I stand with Russia. I need ammo, not a right.
Hey there, freedom fighters. Today I got a special pro-Russian matryoshka for us to unpack. TechLead, a self-described tech millionaire, a famous YouTuber. Well, he was kind of famous at some point. Now even those who know him on YouTube probably despise him for being a dick and abusing the copyright strike system.
Still an insufferable loser. That's what we're dealing with today. It's a YouTuber named TechLead.
Of course, this miserable pro-Russian culture warrior might try to bring this video down, but I'll fight tooth and nail in order to keep this video public. It's 100% fair use. Criticism is the only reason I put every single one of his stupid claims in my video. Before we start unpacking that huge box of contradictions, here's a little bit of context for you guys. I'm a guy from Ukraine. Like my virtual opponent, I'm also a software developer, and actually at some point I was a subscriber of this guy on YouTube. Although I didn't agree with him on lots of things, especially when he tried to play a role of an expert in areas outside of tech. But at least at some point he was kinda entertaining for me, for a guy making my first steps in programming. But I got quickly tired from his useless content. It was all freaking clickbait, so I unsubscribed and forgot about him. But then, when Russian fascists started a full-scale war in my country, YouTube algorithms gave me some relevant TechLead videos about my country. And of course they were filled with bullshit from Russia Today. You could play the Kremlin propaganda bingo with his videos, and you would probably get one of the highest scores. It was obvious that the dude was consuming Russia Today content like crazy. Back then I didn't have time to respond, but now I do, so let's do it. It wasn't actually easy to find his old videos. It looks like he made them private. That was probably the only reasonable thing he did. Of course, if TechLead sincerely apologized for what he did, I wouldn't go for his old unpublished videos. But the guy, instead of apologizing, decided to make a mocking video, a mocking apology video, just to make fun of Ukrainians and other people who oppose Russian fascism, and to spread even more Kremlin propaganda. I actually wanted to start with that apology video, but then I found one of his earlier videos. So let's start with his video called I Stand with Russia.
I stand with Russia. Am I allowed to say that out here, or is somebody going to cancel me if I express some political view that is contrary to the public narrative?
No, dude, they're gonna come for you and take you to the American Gulag, where they will keep you for the rest of your days in the basement, where they will force you to sing how great democracy is. And then, after years of torture, the evil Democrats will poison you with Novichok if you don't start saying glory to Ukraine. Gosh, paranoia is strong in this culture warrior. It's so fucked up when these apologists of different totalitarian regimes try to play the cancel culture victim card.
Getting even absurd, this cancel culture against Russia.
Absolutely not understanding how democracy works, not understanding that in democratic countries people are able to implement their personal sanctions. When they don't like something, they can use their personal freedoms in order to affect something outside of them. Freedom of saying some bullshit for you doesn't mean that other people cannot say what they think about your bullshit. If you do something antisocial, other people of that society might decide to cut you out of their lives or cancel you in other allowed by the law ways. Sometimes these personal sanctions can be reasonable, sometimes unreasonable. Indeed, sometimes they might go too far. That is a serious problem, but that is not the same as taking away your freedoms, idiot. Try going to Russia and standing with a white sheet of paper on some square. Then maybe you'll feel what the real cancel culture is like. This so-called cancel culture in the democratic countries is just personal sanctions that might go too far sometimes, but sometimes they might be totally justified. At least in a democracy, nobody will throw you into a concentration camp just for reposting some slogan like no war or something like that. That's, by the way, one of the tactics of totalitarian regimes. Their propaganda always tries to criticize democracy for not having kinda absolute freedom. But in reality, there's no such thing as absolute freedom. We all have some limitations. What we can achieve is having more freedom. And there is definitely more personal freedom in democracy than in any totalitarian regime. You gotta be extremely stupid not to understand it. It's like claiming that because in a happy marriage people have some kind of limitations, it means that it's the same thing that a marriage with some kind of control freak abuser. Yeah, no difference. No difference at all. Totalitarian apologists don't understand that even though we might not have absolute freedom, but we can definitely have more or less of it. And having more freedom might be worth fighting for. But no, that thought probably doesn't cross their minds. Right from the beginning, TechLead is trying not only to play the victim card, but he also tries to portray himself as someone who is swimming against the tide. He's like this original thinker that doesn't agree with some dogmatic, irrational mob. Of course, that's as far from the truth as it could possibly be. He's just repeating the official government propaganda of a totalitarian regime. How is that original? He's not even coming up with some original talking points, original arguments. Even his analogies are kinda used all over the place. You gotta be an absolute idiot in order to confuse this with critical thinking. The real critical thinking is following the evidence wherever it leads, no matter if that point of view is popular or not. Sometimes society can be mistaken, and you as a critical thinker will have to swim against the tide. But when the society share good models of reality, when they accept true narratives, you would be a fool to prefer a bad model of reality just in order to seem like you're this original thinker, non-conformist. Another stupid thing TechLead said in the beginning is the whole "I stand with Russia" statement. No, idiot, you don't even stand with Russia. You stand with Russian fascists, whose actions only bring harm, disgrace and misery to their own country, to their own people. The real Russian patriots are 100% against Putin. They are being killed by Putin. Of course, I don't defend those patriots. Any Russian patriot is kinda my enemy, even those who oppose Putin, and I don't have time to pity them. But still, you gotta recognize that the real Russian patriots would fight to stop that disgraceful war and remove their paranoid dictator from power. So no, idiot, you don't even stand with Russia. You stand with the Russian fascism.
You know, war is propaganda. Propaganda is the most important weapon out there, so it depends which side have you been brainwashed to believe, or are we...
Oh gosh, here's where the post-truth epistemic relativism kicks in. He's a tech lead after all, right? Why not lead with epistemic relativism? Basically, epistemic relativism is a position on knowledge and truth that sounds like everything is just an opinion. There is no objective truth. You have your truth, I have mine. Every claim is just an opinion, so who are you to judge me, or who are you to judge my opinion? Who are you to say that your opinion is more valid or true than mine? Just because I have the right to hold any opinion, it kind of means that I'm equally justified in believing any kind of bullshit and shit like that. I suppose you have met such people. Sometimes they can be pretty insufferable, probably just as insufferable as dogmatic people. Epistemic relativists are usually so proud that they are not dogmatics. Wow, that's such an achievement, but they don't understand that epistemic relativism is not the same as critical thinking. It's just a convenient philosophical position for people who believe in some crazy bullshit. Because of it, they can believe in the most epic crap and still think that they are smart enough, that their point of view is as valid and justified as any other view. Critical thinkers instead build in their heads falsifiable models of reality with high predictive power. They try to have as good models of reality as possible, good models, good narratives, good maps of reality. They understand that models of reality can be good or bad. But for an epistemic relativist, all models are just opinions. There are no good or bad maps, all maps are equal, and the relativist can just pick and choose whatever he or she wants, and nobody should judge them for their choice because that would be cancel culture. And that kind of thinking is extremely popular among the propagandists of the Russian fascism. Only their low-level propagandists appeal to dogmatism. The more advanced Russian propagandists appeal to epistemic relativism. We gotta understand that. That's how they try to seem like they are critical thinkers, independent thinkers. This, by the way, might be an interesting topic for a separate video. So let's see what else TechLead has to say.
Have you been brainwashed to believe, or are we all going to just simply assume that Russia's the bad guy, right? That's the popular narrative around here.
Again, just saying that the narrative is popular, that's not enough to debunk it. Truth can be popular, can be unpopular. Popularity has nothing to do with how true something is. But it's interesting that he said, that's the popular narrative around here. By around here, you mean in the democratic countries, right? Of course, in Russia, there's another narrative that's extremely popular. And it's not just extremely popular, but it's like the only narrative people are allowed to have. And it happened to be the same narrative that you're pushing on the internet. Isn't that kind of weird by itself? You're trying to play an independent thinker, but you prefer narratives that are popular in places where there is nothing that even remotely resembles the free market of ideas. Russia is the bad guy. That's not just some narrative I blindly believe in. That's a claim I can support with evidence, not just some narrative.
And so this is what doesn't quite sit well with me, which is that most people out here have absolutely no clue what Russia and Ukraine are even fighting about.
Finally, TechLead has said something that I can agree with. Indeed, a lot of people know too little about the events in this part of the world, although of course he said it just to support his relativistic position, not to motivate people to do more research. And no, dude, don't try to project your lack of understanding to all other people who talk about this war. It's obvious what you're doing. You're just trying to make people less willing to help Ukraine. Just because they might not see the whole picture, they might not know or understand something. What does that justify not acting, not doing anything, not helping the victim? Imagine cops doing the same thing every time they saw some crime being committed. Like one guy tries to kill another guy and they are like, well, we don't know the whole history, the whole story. We don't know what happened before we arrived here. Let's just wait and maybe someone will explain us what happened later, like in a couple of years from now. That's not critical thinking. That's an absolutely unproductive strategy behavior. We often have to navigate the world with extremely limited information available to us. The algorithm proposed by TechLead sounds something like, if you don't have enough data, don't jump into conclusions and don't do anything. Even though I agree with the first part about not jumping into conclusions, but I definitely do not agree with the last part, about not doing anything. My algorithm is more like, if you don't have enough data, yes, don't jump into conclusions, but if the situation requires immediate action, then do the most reasonable action, and after that you'll be able to do more research. Else, if the situation doesn't require immediate action, then yeah, do more research and then act after that. In a situation where you see one guy trying to kill another guy on the street, you don't know these guys, you don't know what happened before you saw that scene. With TechLead's algorithm, you would just do nothing. Even if you are able to stop that act of aggression. You would do nothing because you don't know what happened between these guys, right? And of course, this algorithm would be beneficial to the aggressor, not the victim. But if you use my algorithm, you would try to stop the aggressor in order to save the life of the victim, because that is the situation that requires immediate action. When we know army of which country crossed the border first, we know who the invader is. It's not that difficult. The invasion apologists, of course, try to confuse more people, try to make the situation seem much more complicated than it really is. Try to throw in lots of lies and non-sequiturs into the mix. They try to build these extremely complicated models of reality just to make them unfalsifiable. And ignoring a comes razor and just increasing infinitely complexity of some model of some narrative. That's what apologists of totalitarianism often like doing. Of course, it's important to be as informed as you can, But saying that unless you know all about the conflict, only in that case you should help the victim of aggression, that is extremely stupid and really beneficial to the aggressor.
Right, you've got Ukraine crying, and have you ever been in an argument with somebody who's crying? You can't win because people are just saying, oh, look, that person's crying. Why are you so mean? Why do you have to be a bully? That person's crying. As if simply by having somebody crying for help, that they're automatically the victim.
Oh, there's so much to unpack here. Of course, if someone is crying, it doesn't mean that that's the real victim. For example, Russian snowflakes always cry and whine about them being victims of Russophobia or cancel culture, but of course that doesn't mean that they are the victims here, right? No, we say that Ukraine is the victim because it was Russia whose soldiers entered the territory of Ukraine and started killing Ukrainians, not the other way around. I don't know, how dumb can you be in order to not understand it? Of course, if someone is crying, it doesn't mean that they were hit. But if you see someone hitting, yeah, it does mean that the victim is being hit. And with Russia-Ukraine situation, it is as obvious as it can possibly be. We live in a world where countries have their own territories, and if you send your troops into another country's territory without the official invitation of the leaders of that country, without them officially agreeing to this, that is an invasion by definition. You don't have to be a genius to understand that. What TechLead is doing here, that's exactly what a lot of Russian influencers were doing in order to deter the anti-war Russians from protesting, from doing something about the war. They used the same reasoning. If you think that our country is doing something bad, just think again. Don't do anything, just think again, think about it more. Because you might be wrong, just wait and see how everything is gonna end. And then, after centuries, some historians will figure out what really was going on. And that's one of the reasons for passivity in the Russian society. That strategy works to enable the aggressor to keep doing what he's doing, with less opposition, with less resistance. A more humane and reasonable approach in a situation where people are being killed or countries being invaded would be to first stop killing and then to research more what led to that.
Now, maybe, yes, Ukraine may be the victim, but let's take a look at what happened. I put out this tweet here where I said Ukraine may deserve to fail because they banned men ages 18 to 60 from leaving the country for suspending their bank withdrawals to try to protect their own currency from a bank run and from collapsing.
So that idiot thinks that Ukraine, a democratic country that sacrificed the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world in order to make all the humanity safer, now deserves to be invaded and destroyed just because the country has a mobilization strategy that was kind of always used throughout history, or just because there was some kind of temporary bank withdrawal limits. Like, seriously? First of all, that's a complete hypocrisy. Russia is a much larger country that for years were preparing for this war, and even after getting thousands of North Korean soldiers, Russians are still forcefully mobilizing teenagers to serve in their army. In Russia, if you're 18 years old, that's it. You must serve. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, still after almost 3 years of war, only men after 25 are subjected to mandatory mobilization. But no, you stand with Russia, the country that forcefully mobilizes teens to fight an offensive war, the war that they can just end if they go home. But yeah, Ukraine is bad, Russia is good. That's freaking epic double standards. How else a smaller, mostly agrarian country can protect itself? Again, this argument, if a democratic country doesn't provide absolute freedom to its citizens, that is worse than totalitarian regimes. That argument is so ridiculous, come on. Democracy and anarchy are different things, actually. If you don't understand the difference, I suggest you never talk about politics ever again. Democracy is not about having no limits. Democracy is about being able to pick what limits are there in your society. Like the ability to affect those limits by voting for those who have the same political positions that you have. And it is absolutely normal for a democracy to limit the usual freedoms of its citizens during wartime. That's how democracies can be as effective during wartime as totalitarian regimes. Moreover, the government of a democratic country can demand even more from its citizens than a dictator can. Because citizens of a democratic country understand that they have chosen this social contract, they have signed it, that's kind of their decision, so they can be more willing to sacrifice more for something they actually choose. But for a dictator, it's always about trying not to cross this line where it would be absolutely impossible for him to be in control. If we see how countries behaved during the Second World War, we'll see that sometimes democratic countries demanded even more sacrifice from their population than Hitler did. So yeah, thank you for trying to paint this picture like Zelensky is an enemy of Ukrainians or something like that, and only in the sick imagination of the Russian fascists, Ukrainians are being oppressed by their government. No, we're being freaking genocided by Russians. And our government, however imperfect it is trying to prevent it.
And I believe that in many ways, the blood is now on the hands of the Ukrainian government because people want to leave. They're trying to get out of the entire region, and Ukraine is saying, you sit here and you fight for me. You try to save me. They're trying to get out, escape, and just seek a better future for themselves, a better life, and yet their own government is trapping them.
Wow, how dares Ukraine defend itself as a country? Why not just relocate like 30 millions of Ukrainians into Poland? Polish people will be so happy to have their population doubled, right? Especially with people of not their nation, but like their neighbors, most of whom don't speak their language. Who wouldn't be able to accept all the Ukrainian refugees, right? Of course, Poles will easily supply Ukrainians with everything they need in order to have the same level of life they previously had when they live in their own home country. Poles will simply give their own houses to Ukrainians, their own jobs to Ukrainians, and will just, I don't know, go travel across Europe. Or maybe the USA will be willing to accept 30 millions of Ukrainian refugees. I'm sure all these MAGA folks will be so happy about that. Does that plan sound realistic to anybody except TechLead and other Russian propagandists? Don't you think that maybe that's why countries protect themselves, because a country is just a bunch of institutions that a nation is using to organize and defend itself? Did you try to consider that, TechLead? And if Ukrainians are so eager to leave our homes, then why are there still so many women living in Ukraine under constant threat to their lives, sometimes without even having electricity in their homes? There is no law that limits their freedom of movement. They can leave whenever they want. Why are they still here? Can you tell me? I understand that for you it would probably be unthinkable. If an owner of a house with his rifle decides to stay and protect it from some scumbag intruders, even if it's like 2 against 1 or 3 people against 1, and you would be like, you're an absolute idiot. Just give them your house. Even if you think that you are able to protect yourself, you should still just give up. You should never ever risk your life to try to protect something that is yours. Of course, now after almost 3 years of brutal fighting, it'd be absolutely stupid not to see how many Ukrainians do care about their own country. Even people like me, who are not nationalists, not patriots, we still try to help in any way we can. Even though for me personally it doesn't matter that much in which country to live, but still I would never want to live in fucking Russia or North Korea. You gotta be absolutely out of your mind in order to want to live in those miserable totalitarian regimes.
What percentage of Ukrainians actually want to join Russia? Well, most don't really seem to care, right? Some are pro-Russia, some are pro-Western.
Holy shit. So this idiot is doing his research, making conclusions based on some Quora thread. That's like top-notch journalism right there. That's it. I give up. I will never be able to counter that. The funniest thing is that this idiot in his own video shows that the most upvoted response actually has statistics that directly contradicts his claims. The statistics from 2016 that shows that only 3% of Ukrainians wanted to live in Russia back then. And 50% were like, build a wall with Russia, close the borders. And that was the time when we still had tons of Russian propaganda on our TV and radio and other media. Lots of Ukrainians were extremely confused, and still almost nobody wanted to live in freaking Russia. Nowadays there are way less Russophiles in our country, that's for sure. They are mostly members of some anti-government cults, like anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorists, or some Russian Orthodox Church members. The church is still a huge source of Russian propaganda here. By the way, I just remembered one guy who willingly moved to Russia, the guy I knew. He wasn't ethnically Ukrainian, and his wife, I think, was Russian. But still, why would a Ukrainian citizen go and live in Russia? Well, in his case, that was because he took so many loans that he couldn't pay his debts. And instead of paying them, he just ran away to Russia. He gave a couple of interviews to Russian propagandists that kind of demonized Ukraine. For that, they kind of gave him a house to live or something like that. It was really beneficial for that guy. He got rid of his debt, he got a chance to live a new life. All he had to do is just help to kill more Ukrainians by giving some interviews to Russian propagandists. So yeah, there were people like that in Ukraine. There will always be some collaborators in any country. Does the existence of such people prove that Ukrainians don't care about Ukraine at all? Or the fact that some Ukrainians were thinking about moving to Poland, for example? Does that mean that now Poland is justified in invading Ukraine, or what? It is just fucking stupid. And that's exactly the same rhetoric Hitler used when he was invading Poland. He was claiming that he was just protecting Polish Germans from persecution and oppression. So, would you stand with Hitler back then, just like you stand with the Russian fascist now? Would you become Hitler's apologist as well? Okay, so going back to TechLead's sources. In the video, this guy simply ignores contradictory statistics from a response with a rating of 55. Of course, that's doesn't mean shit, but still, for this guy, it probably matters, right? So he skips the response with a rating of 55 and focuses on a response with the rating of 27. I hope he's not that dumb in order to think that those votes were from Ukrainians ourselves, right? I suppose he knows that Russian also can upvote. Anyway, it's just so fucking cringy. 20-something upvotes on Quora, probably from Russian imperialists. That's enough to convince this guy, to make him repeat it almost word for word, and even share his screen recording as if he is reading some scientific article or something like that. Look, I have sources! Sources! I'm not just bullshitting you people. Look, here, right here on the internet. I got some Russian guy's opinion about Ukrainians. I got stuff to prove my points. I guess whenever we want to learn something about Ukrainians, we just gotta find some random Russian guy and take his word for it, right? Everybody knows that Russians are the biggest expert on Ukraine and Ukrainians. Just like all those Nazis who were experts on what Jews were like, right? A guide to Hebrew psychology, written by a German Nazi. He'll tell you everything you need to know about what Jews actually think or don't think, what they want and don't want. Just listen to that guy, right?
Don't really seem to care, right? Some are pro-Russia, some are pro-Western. Most people just want a better life, and they're not necessarily going to let their own political beliefs get in the way of a better life for them. They just want a nice life. And
the only reason why Ukrainians don't seem to you like they care about their country is that all you know about Ukrainians you get from Russian propagandists. Like this guy on Quora, a guy with a pro-Russian separatist flag. Maxim Nesterenko, director of Russian Information Regulation Agency. Holy shit. That sounds official, right? Sounds like a real expert on Ukrainians. And what the hell is that? Russian Information Regulation Agency? What is it? The closest thing to that agency that I googled was the actual Roskomnadzor. If you don't know who these motherfuckers are, those are the Russian fascist thought police. They are the ones that monitor the internet, find Russians who repost something that doesn't fit their fascist dogma, and make sure they are put into prison. And probably this guy is working in some kind of similar organization. Again, why don't we just go and quote Gestapo about Jews? If Gestapo told you that most Jews are happy to live in their concentration camps, that must be true, right?
And they're not necessarily going to let their own political beliefs get in the way of a better life for them. They just want a nice life. And
Oh, so you stand with the Russian fascists that kill and torture us because you just care about us, Ukrainians, right? You just want us to have better lives. Oh, that's so cute, dude. Just thank you. Thank you from all my heart, motherfucker. It makes perfect fucking sense. Why don't you just go back in time and stand with the German Nazis? Because most Jews just wanted a good life. That's like logical. Let's stand with Russian terrorists who kill Ukrainians because we care about Ukrainians and those Ukrainians just want to have better lives. Who cares if you can or cannot elect your government, your president? Who cares how much freedom you have? These silly things cannot possibly affect people's well-being, right? People who just want to live a better life shouldn't think about the future, about the lives of their kids. Just live here and now. You only live once. Don't care what happens around you. Be like outside of politics. Just make sure you get good salary. If someone pays you good money to become a slave, you should definitely take the money. It's a win-win. Just be a good slave and you'll have a good life. That's like a good slogan.
so if a company in Russia were to offer them maybe double the income, double the salary, well, then they would migrate over to Russia. And if their life is better in Ukraine, maybe they'll stay there. And then there's some hardcore nationalists on either side who are going to just stay in the country and fight to their death for it. But most people aren't necessarily going to be like that.
Yeah, who cares about millions of Ukrainians who are patriots, who are nationalists, who have a little bit different set of values than you? Do you think that they just deserve to be freaking killed by the Russian fascists? If my brother is a patriot and I'm not, I should just leave him here to die and run away to have a good life, right? Should I be okay with my neighbors dying, with my co-workers, friends, relatives, just because they are patriots? Do they simply deserve to die just for being ready to risk their own lives for their values? And just because they might be a little bit more tribalistic than some other Ukrainians, does that mean that they are worse as humans and we should just let them die? No, motherfucker, none of us deserve to die, independently of what we think about country, politics. Only those motherfuckers who come here to kill us, they deserve to die. They devalued their lives with their actions. Look, to me, living here in Ukraine, it seems like most of Ukrainians actually patriots, and only a small percentage of people like me who are not. So should I just run away and be okay with all of them being slaughtered? No, I'm not a freaking psychopath to think like that. It's fucked up on so many levels. Do you realize that you can say the same thing about any other country? Like those folks in France just wanna have good lives. That's why if that country ever gets invaded by some totalitarian regime or just another European country, I will stand with the invaders and I will be an invasion apologist, right? Is that your logic? Is that how you think? Is that how the whole world should think? Is that your idea for the world order? Is that how humanity should act? Should we just let fascistic totalitarian regimes to take over the democratic countries one by one and simply don't do anything?
And so when you're out there virtue signaling, saying that I'm wrong, that I'm a terrible person, and that Ukrainian people must fight for their independence, and yet you're sitting there, you yourself, you're not willing to fight physically. You'd rather live a better life, right? That's worth more than independence of Ukraine for you. So if you really care, why don't you put on some boots and go over to Ukraine, pick up a gun, and fight for Ukrainian governments?
So, by the logic of this idiot, if you stand with Ukraine and democracy, but you're not ready yourself to come to Ukraine and fight, you're just virtue signaling. But when he stands with the Russian fascists, and he's also not willing to fight for Russia, no, that's not just virtue signaling, that's like real honest opinion. He's being brave doing that, right? And those are definitely not double standards. So, if you do not devalue your life completely, it means that all the values you have are not really your values. Is that how it works? You either value something more than your life, or you don't value it at all. That's the true dichotomy right there. That's like one of the most idiotic arguments ever that idiots use against different types of activism. Like, don't tell me that you care about people not dying from hunger if you haven't yet sold and donated everything you got. You hypocrite. You still have some cash in your wallet. Or don't tell me that you care about animals if you're not ready to sacrifice your life for some jellyfish. You hypocrite virtue signaler. No, having different values than your life doesn't automatically devalue your life. And this thing is like even more hypocritical because you stand for the side that is doing the invasion. The war will stop if they stop attacking, if they just go home. So if you support them, you support more people dying, so why the fuck don't you go and die for them? Russians will give you both a ride and some ammo. The defender of the Russian world. And by the way, of course, no sane person who stands with Ukraine says something like, you Ukrainians must defend your country even if you don't want to do this. Fight until the end cause I told you so. There's no ride for you. There's only ammo. No, actually our allies are more willing to give us a ride than as much ammo as we need. If I'm not mistaken, freaking North Korea has given Russia like 6 times more artillery shells than we got from our democratic allies. Is that okay? More ammo could actually really save Ukrainian lives. But no, every time our allies are like, do you wanna ride? What about now? Do you wanna ride now? Ride? Your ride is waiting for you. Come on, take the ride already. We don't wanna give you too much ammo because we gotta think about our culture wars, about our election, voters, and of course about not pissing off Putin too much. Just take a ride, Zelensky, and let's get done with it. Of course, we won't be able to give a ride to all 30 millions of Ukrainians. We don't need that many refugees here. So they'll just have to be slaughtered or enslaved by Russians. And those who survive will be mobilized by Russian, forcefully mobilized and thrown into another country they decide to liberate, probably Moldova or some of the Baltics.
Let's take a look here. Twitter says it will consider censoring emerging narratives about the Ukrainian war. So cancel culture is now coming into play where we're going to try to shape the narratives here.
Wow, terrorists and their supporters are being cancelled on the Western internet platforms. When a private business exercises its right to come up with new policies for their platform, that's so much worse than the Russian cancel culture, right? When Roskomnadzor bans you and sends you to prison, that's not canceling. That's actually setting you free. That's not cancel culture, that's freedom culture. That's what we need more, right? More of Russian freedom culture. That's an environment where the truth is more likely to exist. Not on all those internet platforms that are owned by private companies, only the official Russian government media. That's where you're more likely to find the truth.
Meanwhile, over on Instagram, there's a lot of influencers, such as myself, who are capitalizing on the war. You've got people posting fake imagery from video games, even pretending that these scenes are from Ukraine in order to capture eyeballs and gain more followers on Instagram.
Wow, look at that. Individual content creators that are free to make content and make money of it. That's also gotta be a part of the evil Western cancel culture and democratic propaganda. When you have all these private social networks that are able to come up with their own community guidelines, and when you have countless individual creators who got their money from ads instead of being paid by the government, that's cancel culture right there. That's dictatorship. Evil dictatorship of private businesses and individuals on Instagram. And of course, all those individuals are there only for the money. None of them can possibly really care about what democracy is or about human lives. TechLead is just making content for the money and he just projects his motivations to everybody else. Like there cannot be any other type of motivation. Of course, if you are willing to spread Russian propaganda, you can make even more money and you won't even have to care about ads or donations. The regime will just pay you directly for your efforts. So I wonder why all those people who only care for the money, why don't they just spread only Russian propaganda? Don't you see some kind of contradiction in that?
And undoubtedly, there's going to be a narrative, a bias against Russia because, hey, historically, we fought against Russia in the World War II. That was the West versus Russia, the Cold War.
Holy crap. Let me just repeat this. Historically, we fought against Russia in World War II. And that was a fight, the West versus Russia, the Cold War. Does this make any sense to you guys? Does this guy even know that World War II and the Cold War were actually different historical events? Holy crap, World War II was Russia against the West. Holy fuck. And dude, there wasn't even Russia as a country back then. And the USA didn't fought on the side of Hitler or something like that. They fought against Hitler. A bunch of different countries fought against the Hitler coalition. No wonder that this guy also believes in Ukrainians being Nazis or something like that.
Did you know that Ukraine also supported Hitler?
Did you know that there was no Ukraine or Russia as countries back then? There was just the USSR, a fascistic totalitarian regime that had multiple different republics, all ruled by Moscow. And by the way, did you know that the USSR actually supported Hitler? They actually fought side by side in order to occupy Poland. Of course, that was kind of an attack from different sides, but still, when two totalitarian regimes attack a country in coordination with the previous agreements, what's that if not fighting side by side? That's how Stalin and Hitler started the World War II. They attack Poland, they celebrate their victory with a unified military parade. They split that country in two, and then they go about splitting the rest of Europe and trying to conquer other independent countries. Stalin was consistently helping Hitler with resources and stuff up until Hitler turns on Stalin and decides to invade the USSR. Then, the miserable Soviet Union regime involuntarily happened to be fighting against Nazis after helping them. And even though Hitler was kind of fighting Stalin with just one hand, because all the other countries were attacking from different sides, Stalin still was losing badly until the USA actually started supplying them with incredible amounts of resources and weapons. But let's forget about the countries. What about Ukrainians as a nation? Were they Nazis? No, motherfucker, they were fighting against Nazis, actually. Did you know that much more Ukrainians died fighting the Nazis than Americans, British, and French combined? Did you know that fact? Before freaking claiming that we were Nazis. Of course, they won't tell you about that on Russia Today. That's for sure. Yeah, there were some Ukrainian nationalists that at some point decided to collaborate with Germans in order to achieve independence from the Soviet fascists. But that collaboration didn't last long. They quickly became enemies with the Nazis as well. Some of them, like Stepan Bandera, were even put into Nazi concentration camps. That's also something Russians won't tell useful idiots like you. Of course, we can sit and judge those Ukrainian nationalists, even for their short collaboration with Nazis. But you gotta understand what choice they had. If you think that you're entitled to throw stones at somebody for their decisions, at least you gotta know what options they had to choose from, you know? And those Ukrainian nationalists simply didn't have any good options. Fighting alone against both the USSR and the Nazis would just be a suicide. So they actually only had two choices. On one hand, the totalitarian regime that kills millions of Jews. On another, the totalitarian regime that kills millions of Ukrainians. That was the choice. Motherfuckers who kill Jews or motherfuckers who kill Ukrainians. What would you choose if you were a Ukrainian? And also keep in mind that at that time a lot of people didn't have a clue what happened in the Nazi concentration camps. Imagine a simple guy from a Ukrainian village. He knows nothing about how the Nazis treat Jews or other groups of people. He knows nothing about that. All he knows is that Germany is kind of this great country with advanced weapons, science, and lots of success on the battlefield. Of course, that simple village guy won't mind joining Germans in order to fight against an inhumane totalitarian regime that killed and imprisoned millions of Ukrainians. That would be like the most obvious choice ever, like a no-brainer. Of course, now we understand that that was a bad choice. But that's just because we know more now. We see a bigger picture. So first of all, TechLead, your stupid accusations are historically idiotic. And also, that shouldn't even matter what happened in the previous century. There is no way it could justify the current aggression of a fascistic totalitarian regime against our independent democratic country. It's just a freaking non sequitur.
Putin's claim is that he's trying to denazify Ukraine. Now, whether this is true or not is something people are still debating.
Oh, did you know that people are also still debating whether or not the Earth is flat? All kinds of conspiracy theorists can debate whatever they want, but reasonable people should not believe claims without evidence. Or believe some bad evidence, some photoshopped photographs or something like that, some anecdotal evidence. That is not something you should believe when you're talking about geopolitics. Some anecdotal evidence might be like enough to determine who stole your TV or something like that, but not when you're talking about freaking global issues. Russian fascists will always try to demonize us. Will you just believe whatever they say? If an aggressor is smart enough to demonize its victim, does that mean we should just allow the aggressor to do whatever he wants? That stupid perfect victim argument, like you gotta be a perfect victim in order for us to help you, it's freaking idiotic. There are no perfect victims, there are no perfect countries. There will never be like this perfectly good and amazing country that everybody agrees should be protected at all cost. You think Jews in the Nazi Germany weren't demonized? The Nazis used lots of anecdotal evidence, so-called evidence, in order to demonize the whole ethnicity. And for many years the Russian fascists have been doing the same. Unfortunately, most of Russians, even those who are now like pro-war, they didn't do much to stop that. To stop that demonization of Ukrainians on their TVs and media. And now useful idiots like you simply help the Russian fascists. And some of them even do it for free. What the fuck?
Putin had always viewed Russia and Ukraine as a single country. He would like to unify these countries into a single whole because fundamentally he believes Ukraine to be an illegitimate government originally belonging as a part.
Wow, guys. Putin or Hitler just wanted to unite more countries so that people could live happily together under one roof, under one dictator, like a big happy family. I guess for this motherfucker it is important what the absolutely illegitimate president of Russia thinks of the legitimacy of our presidents. Presidents we, Ukrainian people, voted for in real democratic elections. While people grow up in Russia with the same president and often cannot even imagine someone else as their president, they don't even know what the real elections are. It's just like this cargo cult for them. And when they dare saying something about the legitimacy of our president, I guess we gotta listen to them, right?
Not to mention, he doesn't want NATO coming into the mix. Like, Ukraine was trying to join NATO, and the idea is that if you attack a single NATO country, then you attack all of them.
Of course, Ukraine joining NATO, that would completely destroy Putin's plans about turning Ukraine into another Belarus. Of course, that motherfucker didn't want that to happen. What kind of aggressor wants his victim to get full protection from him? Is some kind of abuser and aggressor justified when he's like, don't call the cops. Don't call the cops, I'm telling you. If you call cops, they'll freaking kill you. Well, maybe don't behave like an aggressor, and maybe then people won't try to call cops on you, right? Don't force other people to feel the need to protect themselves from you. We Ukrainians didn't even think about joining NATO before the start of the Russian aggression. We even had it written in our law that we are a neutral state, and we only decided to change that law in December 2014, after the start of the Russian invasion. Only then we were like, oh, maybe we shouldn't just be a neutral country because, well, Russia only attacks neutral countries. Russia can only bark at NATO, not bite. So of course we started to want to join NATO in order to protect ourselves from further Russian aggression. The more Russia escalated, the more we wanted to join NATO. That's how it was. And we never felt like we were welcomed in NATO. For us, it was like banging on the closed door with other people inside who didn't want to let us in. like, open the door, zombies are just behind me, please let me in. And they're like, nah, dude, it's too dangerous for us. Deal with those zombies somehow yourself. If you, like, kill all of them, then we will consider letting you in.
And Ukraine kept trying to join them, so Russia said, look, they didn't want an enemy on its doorsteps.
That particular dogma of the Russian fascism is just a recent resurrection of the old Soviet manipulative strategy. Like any other totalitarian cult, they needed a boogeyman, they needed to have a powerful enemy just to use it as a convenient excuse for their own cops. They needed it to develop that us against the world mentality in the members of their cult. And by the way, at first they weren't even against us joining NATO, or they actually wanted themselves to join NATO. They have some projects together, but because they wanted some kind of special treatment and didn't want to change themselves, they simply didn't manage to become a part of NATO. Because that alliance has its standards, plus all the members gotta give their agreement. It's not like some American president decides if you can or cannot join. So only after that failed attempt, those losers started to push the anti-NATO rhetoric, and mostly for their own population.
And so Putin's fear is, let's imagine Ukraine is a NATO member and starts these military operations. In Putin's eyes, the West promised back in 1990 that NATO would not expand an inch to the east, but they did so anyways.
In Putin's eyes, the West promised... Well, yeah, you got me. I cannot argue with that statement. There might be whatever you want in Putin's eyes, in Putin's imagination, but what I care about is reality. What happened in reality. And of course, reality has nothing to do with the narratives the Russian propaganda is pushing. Let's listen together what Jake Broe has to say about that NATO expansion myth. Hope Jake doesn't mind me using a part of his video. You should definitely watch the full video, but I just think that Jake said it pretty well.
Let's now address this Russian propaganda talking point. NATO promised they would never expand. No, they didn't. Send me the link. Send me the article in which all the NATO countries in the 1990s put the pen to the paper and agreed that they would never add new members, that they would never expand east or closer to Russia's borders. No such page exists. No such document exists. The NATO countries, in consensus, never agreed to this. So where does this lie? Where does this talking point come from? And it comes from a conversation that U.S. Secretary of State James Baker had with Gorbachev in 1991. I'll link this article down below from Brookings, Did NATO Promise Not to Enlarge? And Mikhail Gorbachev says no. And here is the issue that was discussed. Making sure that NATO's military structures would not advance and that additional armed forces would not be deployed on the territory of East Germany after German reunification. Baker's statement was made in that context. Everything that could have been and needed to be done to solidify that political obligation was done. It was fulfilled by NATO. Gorbachev continued that the agreement on a final settlement with Germany said that no new military structures would be created in the eastern part of the country. No additional troops would be deployed, no weapons of mass destruction would be placed there, and it has been obeyed by NATO all of these years. It's a lie. There was never a promise. There was never a discussion about no NATO enlargement, no NATO expansion east. This mythical conversation that the Russians won't stop talking about was about East Germany. And Gorbachev says NATO honored all of the commitments made in this discussion. Even though Secretary of State James Baker, it's impossible for him to speak for the entire alliance. If NATO as an alliance didn't want to expand, all member states would have to agree to that. And in a way they do. Every time NATO adds a new member, every current member has to vote for it. So this is straight nonsense from the Russians. There's nothing you can link me. There's nothing you can send me. There's nothing you can show me that any kind of promise was made that NATO would never add new members. But this is what the Russians say, and this is what people who support Russia say, even though there's no basis in truth for any of it. And they took their cues from the Nazis. If you repeat a lie often enough, people will just believe it, and you will even come to believe it yourself. So on all these debate shows, you've got propagandist after propagandist after propagandist saying the exact same thing, when it's a lie. There's no truth to it. There's no facts.
Of course, you should watch the full video on his channel for more context. Also, subscribe to him, he's making really cool videos about this war. And I'm gonna continue and finish my response to TechLead.
And as I understand, Putin has been maybe ideological in his approach, in which it seems like he's trying to protect Russian culture, peoples, and values, even those people within Ukraine.
You know, I was one of those Russian-speaking Ukrainians. I was speaking Russian my whole life, like 99% of the time. I had clients mostly in Russia, I was making YouTube videos mostly in Russian. Also, I have lived in different regions of Ukraine, and I have never felt any judgment from other Ukrainians because of my Russian. Not even a single judgmental look or something like that. Only after Russia started attacking us, people started to defend Ukrainian-speaking people in Ukraine, because before that they were actually the ones that were not treated that well. I remember Russian-speaking people using some kind of jokes about Ukrainian-speaking people, things like that. That wasn't pretty. Ukrainian-speaking people often felt the need to switch to Russian, because otherwise they might be fired from work or something like that. That was really, really bad. But now things are changing, and you might find Ukrainians who practice their own freedom of speech and will simply not talk to you in Russian. That's like the crazy persecution of the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine. Some Ukrainians say that they don't understand you if you talk to them in Russian. Oh, I'm so persecuted. My feelings are hurt. That's freaking Nazism. So as I said, I was like living my life, speaking mostly Russian. Nobody had any problems with that. But you know who motivated me to stop speaking Russian and start speaking Ukrainian? Putin did. Putin and all those Russian fascists that used the same rhetoric that Hitler used when he invaded Poland. Hitler was saying that he's protecting Germans in another country. And Putin says the same thing, and not just about Ukraine. A lot of neighbors of Russia have suffered the same fate. In the USSR, communists used to forcefully relocate thousands of people just to take their homes and put Russians to live in their homes. So of course every post-Soviet country has pretty huge Russian diaspora. And of course it wouldn't be a problem if not for Russian fascism, a totalitarian ideology and a cult that recruits members mostly among the Russian diaspora and the Russian-speaking population. And then those brainwashed cult members by command and with the support of Moscow start creating problems wherever they are. Start creating separatist movements. If they're successful, start creating these criminal separatist regions. Instead of peacefully living in a country and respecting the local language and culture, they start demanding some special treatment, start causing trouble. Of course, I'm not saying that about all members of the Russian diaspora. But unfortunately, in any post-Soviet country, there are lots of brainwashed cult members of this Ruski Mir cult. It's like in that series of strategy games, Total War Warhammer. There's this interesting game mechanics, corruption, vampiric corruption, chaos corruption. If you play for the vampires, for example, first try to spread this corruption to the neighboring territories. That will let you capture and hold the territory more easily. So it really feels like that's exactly what's happening with the Russian world, Ruski Mir, that Russian fascist ideology.
And so parts of Ukraine, especially those on the eastern side, have actually wanted to belong into Russia, and they support Russia, like the territory of Crimea, voluntarily escaped from Ukraine and separated, becoming a part of Russia, annexed in 2014. And there's these other territories on the eastern side that also are trying to do the same thing.
So, Russian propagandists told you that these regions wanted to become a part of Russia, and you just believe it, right? Is that how your independent, original thinking works? And you don't just simply believe it yourself. No, you also spread that bullshit to millions of your viewers. The truth is that we simply don't know how many people in the occupied by Russia regions actually wanted the region to be occupied. And it would be extremely silly to just believe claims of a totalitarian regime, claims that are supported only by some anecdotal evidence, by some interviews with particular people, ignoring the same kind of interviews or statements of those Ukrainians who were forced to leave those regions to become refugees. That's just pure totalitarian propaganda, and you're helping to spread that propaganda. The elected officials of those regions has never made any official requests about wanting to separate from Ukraine, until the Russian mercenaries, the Russian terrorists, haven't captured those territories, tortured and killed pro-Ukrainian people, or forced them to leave and become refugees, then organized their fake elections, referendums. Of course, during the full-scale invasion they did the same fake referendums. But this time the whole world was clearly able to see how Russians play their dirty games. You gotta be an absolute brain-dead idiot in order to believe the results of voting organized by the Russian fascists, especially after cleansing the region of those Ukrainians who would disagree. Nazi Germans also used to organize these fake referendums in some countries where they obviously got the results they needed. And we would be stupid to consider the results of those referendums valid, So by claiming that those regions of Ukraine just wanted to separate and they escaped Ukraine, they wanted to escape democracy and join an authoritarian country with some freaking dictator. They wanted to be some kind of second-class citizens there, and they probably wanted to start the war, right? It's so fucked up. You're just simply lying there. Not providing any arguments, not providing any evidence, just providing Russian fascist lies.
And so, as Putin states, Ukraine is not just a neighboring country for us, it is an inalienable part of our own history, culture, and spiritual space. Since time immemorial, the people living in the southwest of what has historically been Russian land have called themselves Russians. What we now call Ukraine, he says, was entirely created by Russia.
Well, here you're repeating the pseudo-historical dogmas of the Russian fascists. Dogmas they really, really believe in, dogmas they teach in their schools. The only problem is that, just like the rest of their dogmas, that's just a big stinky pile of bullshit, which of course you don't even bother checking. You just eat it without a spoon just by dipping your whole face in it, swallowing it like you're dying from hunger, and then you also feed it to your subscribers. No, Ukrainians are definitely not Russians, just because Russians stole the name of a country that no longer exists, and that existed mostly on the territory of Ukraine, with the center in Kiev, of course. No, it doesn't mean that we are the same nation. It's like saying that modern Romania equals Roman Empire, and Italy was actually created by Romania, and of course Rome, by definition, was built by Romanians, right? No, it's completely like the other way around. First, the Roman Empire conquered territories of modern Romania. People there started calling themselves Romans, and that's how the country got its name. And the fact that Italy doesn't call itself the Roman Empire anymore, or some kind of Rome land, it doesn't mean that another country which has a name that mentions Rome, that now it has the right to be called the original Roman Empire, or something like that. The fact that Romanians still keep their name that refers to the Roman Empire doesn't mean that they are the original true Romans, and that those Italians are just confused Romanians. They just gotta surrender their whole country to Romania, start speaking the Romanian language, not Italian of course. They gotta become Romanian slaves, little Romanians, and the historical justice will be restored. Give Rome back to Romanians. But that's exactly what the Russian fascists claim about Ukraine. Those pseudoscientific idiots also claim that the English language actually came from Russian, because there are some similar words. Do you believe that shit as well? And by the way, do you know why the Russian chauvinists are trying to steal our history, are always trying to assimilate us and tell that we are one nation or something like that? Because they are envious of our European roots. because they don't want to be seen as Asians for some reason. Of course, there's nothing bad in being Asian, but the Russians want to be seen as Europeans, whatever the cost. They really want to be Slavs, not Asians. And you, an Asian guy, you stand with those who think that it's kind of more shameful to be an Asian than to be a European. Just think about that.
It is intolerable to Putin because
It is intolerable to Putin. Oh wow. One stupid paranoid dictator's feelings are more important than the whole Ukrainian nation and what we want for us and our country, right? The sheer entitlement of the Russian imperialists is freaking crazy. They think that they can just invade any country in order to change something they don't like. Who the fuck are they? Miserable toilet seat looters. Fucking brainwashed slaves that always try to make other people as miserable as they are.
it is intolerable to Putin because the Ukrainian government seeks to legitimate itself by creating conflict with Russia, both.
The Ukrainian government doesn't seek to legitimate itself. Only absolutely brainless pro-Russian fascist conspiracy theorists can claim that our government isn't legitimate. And what conflict with Russia was ever created by Ukraine? Tell me. Russia was the one always breaking any agreements, any promises, and absolutely cowardly and treacherously trying to commit more and more acts of military aggression. Today they promise you that they are your friends, tomorrow they kill your kids. Come on, what conflict was initiated and created by Ukraine? Maybe it was Ukraine that started annexing Russian regions. Maybe it was Ukraine that tried to put its puppet as president of Russia. Maybe it was Ukraine that started sending terrorists into Russia. Or maybe it was Ukraine that started the full-fledged war, openly invading Russia. I don't know, maybe it's just your favorite game, simply saying that white is black, black is white, war is peace, peace is war, slavery is freedom, freedom is slavery. But for us Ukrainians, it's not a game. It's our lives, it's the lives of our families and friends, and we will never forget motherfuckers like you, who used to help Russian fascists to kill and torture our people. By spreading their propaganda, by demonizing our nation, our country, our government, our patriots, by trying to lower the amount of help we get, we will not forget this. And the internet will not forget this, no matter if you delete your videos or not.
Oppressing its native Russian speakers and menacing Russia's borders.
I am a native Russian speaker. Tell me, who's oppressing me in my country? А ты безмозглое галимое путинское дерьмо. Oh shit. I said something in Russian. And I said it in a video. Oh shit. I guess no more YouTube videos for me. The Ukrainian Nazis are gonna come for me, cut out my tongue and then just kill me. Shit, I'm doomed, guys. So at least subscribe, please, and like and share the video. That's my last video after all. And yeah, guys, don't forget to tell France and French people that they must invade Canada in order to protect French-speaking people over there from persecution. TechLead here is ready to fully support France if it decides to do that. So go France! TechLead is with you. Together you're undefeatable. Save French speakers in Canada.
What's going on with Ukraine? Well, Putin has called for Ukraine to just surrender. Nobody has to die, right? No one has to die at all, just surrender. That's it. No blood needs to be shed.
Holy shit. How did you even come with that genius idea? That's freaking huge. That's like a recipe for not ever having any wars in the world. No more wars. And it is a really simple recipe. Only 4 simple rules. Rule number 1. Any country is allowed to invade any other country using some lame excuse. Rule number 2. The invader gotta offer their victim the surrender option. Rule number 3. The victim must necessarily accept the surrender option in order to avoid bloodshed. And the last rule, rule number 4, the same rules also apply to other dangerous situations like rape or robbery. The rapist simply gotta offer the option of having consensual sex, and the victim must necessarily accept that option and give consent. And that's it. There will be no more rape victims in the world. There will be no more wars. We will all live in peace and harmony, like a big happy family. All that's needed is for all victims to just always give up. Do give up. The genius slogan of TechLead that can truly make the world better for everybody. Do give up. Always say yes. By this point, I feel like I'm trying to argue with a kindergarten kid. I don't know, it's like an interesting experience, I'd say. Anyway, thanks guys for watching until the end of the video, or listening if you're listening in an audio podcast format. Thanks for being with me here. I thought I would be able to respond to 2 of TechLead's videos in one go, but I'll have to leave the second video for another day. So again, subscribe if you don't want to miss it. And seriously, don't forget that our level of totalitarianismophobia isn't high enough yet.